part of building a great team is knowing your own strengths and weaknesses and knowing how to get out of the way of your weaknesses and trusting that you hired the right person and trusting that they are putting things in place. And oftentimes the only way you can do that is by hiring experience.
Welcome, ModelFAs. This is David DeSell, your host of the ModelFA podcast and the president of the ModelFA. And actually wanted to start off with some good news that I just found out the other day. So today is January 20th, and you're probably listening to this now in March. But the other day I had one of our prior guests reach out, Ivan Farber, who's been on a couple times, and let us know through one of the podcast rating websites, listennotes.com. Let us know that the ModelFA podcast, across the millions and millions of podcasts that are out in the entire world, ranks in the top 2.5% globally. So I wanted to share that with you while also saying thanks to all of you for taking the time to listen, to leave reviews, to share the episode, be engaged, suggest new guests. Without all of yours attention and feedback, collaboration, and support, that wouldn't be possible. So just wanted to start off and say thank you for that. With that, I am very excited to introduce our guest, Blair Lewis. So Blair actually came to us as a result of an introduction from one of our clients, Brian Malaysia. And Brian introduced me to Blair as soon as we got on the intro call. Could tell he was a cool dude and we vibed together. And he is the president of global recruiters of Mid-Cities. And he runs an executive level searches for wealth management, asset management, and insurance distribution clients. So we're going to spend some time today unpacking a little bit about his story, as well as when it makes sense to engage someone like him, at what stage in your business. So with that being said, Blair, welcome to the show. Appreciate you joining.
Yeah, thanks, David. Congratulations on the success, not only of ModelFA, but of the podcast representing it. That's pretty incredible. I have a podcast. We don't sniff the top 2.5%. So congratulations.
I appreciate that. In due time, just keep pumping out the episodes and I'm sure it will be good to go. With that being said, for those who are listening, hopefully you've come across one of our video clips of this episode in particular, because if you've come across the headshot, you'll notice Blair looks a little different than he does in his headshot. I told him last time around that he's got to update that. He's taken advantage of the COVID times to get past the awkward stage of growing the hair out, and he's got some nice flow that I'm looking at right now.
I got to tell you, you telling me I'm past the awkward stage gives me so much confidence, David. When you've had the same haircut for 40 years and suddenly you grow it out, I still get shocked at what I see in the mirror for sure. But yeah, it's been fun. If nothing else, it's a good conversation piece.
Love it. Well, like I said, appreciate you joining. I do want to get a sense. Have you always been involved in the financial services industry? Were you doing something totally different before? Give us a sense as to kind of where your career got kickstarted.
Well, like most people out of college, at least most kids in the 90s out of college, I didn't have a clue what I wanted to do. I knew my GPA wasn't shocking the world, and the Ernst & Youngs and Big Fours weren't lining up for me. And so I had a good sense it would be sales oriented. My absolute child hero was Alex P. Keaton on Family Ties. That'll date me a little bit, but I've already said the 90s, so I'm already dated. And so I was always kind of fascinated with the stock market and, being wealthy at a young age. And so I got into being a stockbroker. And as a lot of 20-year-olds realize when they try that, now they call it a financial advisor. But when they try that role, they realize, oh, I'm trying to talk to millionaires. And they're looking at me like I'm their grandkid, Mm-hmm. And they're thinking, why in the world would I trust you with their money? But I had an epiphany. I was at Merrill Lynch in Sugar Land in the Houston area. And a wholesaler named Sherry English, who represented AIM, modern day today Invesco, she came in and was talking about her mutual fund that she wanted the Merrill advisors to buy. And like Saul on the road to Damascus in the Bible, scales fell through my eyes and I saw my future. I was like, I think I could absolutely wholesale. That looks like a blast. Talking to financial advisors, they know things go up and down. They don't hold the wholesaler responsible. This would be great. And so I began a path towards wholesaling and moved out to Arizona with a little company called Pilgrim America. And so much of life is timing and chance. And when I went out there, they had a bank fund. And there was only one other player. John Hancock had a bank and thrift fund that was killing it. And we were the only competition. So you could make a really good living off of the crumbs from the John Hancock bank fund. So Pilgrim America just took off and eventually became what you know today as Voya. It went through a couple of iterations, ING funds and things of that nature. And so I hit a home run there. But when I was wholesaling, I was in Florida. I was where you are. And by the way, looking at the reflection on your thing, it looks like you're in the middle of a storm. So thank you for making the call with me. But they moved me out to Florida, and I was living in Tampa at the time and just having a blast. I was in my late 20s, living in Florida, making great money. It was a really incredible time in my life. And there was a part of me when I became a father in my early 30s that I wanted to raise my kid in Texas. I was a Texan, wanted my kid to be a Texan. And so I started looking for jobs in Texas. And anyone who knows wholesaling as an industry will know you're only as good as your contacts. And I didn't have any contacts in Texas. I had contacts in Florida. So I ended up, coming second a lot, but eventually talked Cohen and Steers into allowing me to build out their Texas territory. So that got me back here. So financial services has always been in the mix. I stayed in wholesaling for 20 years. And it was one of those moments that I think a lot of people get to in life where they're like, I feel like I've done everything I can do here. And I was looking for something entrepreneurial. I really kind of wanted to hang my shingle out somewhere. And that ended up being recruiting. Basically, I was recruited by a recruiter. A recruiter called me who was selling franchises to global recruiters. And you could run the shop your own way. You could recruit whatever you wanted, but they kind of handled the back office side of it. And I was like, that makes a hell of a lot of sense. And so I decided in 2012 that I would go into a whole different industry and try recruiting. And so I've honed it, over the last 8-9 years down into what I do, because it just kind of like starting off out of college. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to recruit, but eventually kind of found my way into asset and wealth management. It's the space I knew and really just had a little bit more fun every year. 2020 sucked, but mostly it's been a little bit better every year.
Cool. So there's a lot there. I'm curious to know. So a lot of recruiters, I got, air quotes up for those who are listening. I know a lot of recruiters in the industry where they primarily focus on recruiting advisors with books of business to other firms. My understanding, and certainly correct me if I'm wrong, you're more so focused on executive level roles within those firms, not necessarily folks that have books of business. Is my interpretation correct, or am I a little off?
No, you're dead on. At first, that's what everyone wanted me to recruit. I had been a wholesaler in Texas for a long time. I've been a wholesaler in Florida. I knew a lot of financial advisors who had very successful books. And so the Merrill Lynch's and UBS's and Morgan Stanley's, they all asked me to recruit for them. And what I realized is recruiting a financial advisor with a book of business is very profitable. You make a great, living doing it, but it's a long process. It takes a long time to get someone out of a comfort zone, to leave, have the confidence to bring their book with them. And as a independent contractor, a person who, quite frankly, if I'm not placing someone in a job, I'm not getting paid. Right. I was like, I don't know if I can chase these guys for 2, 3, 4 years, in order to get something great going. And back in 2016, when the Department of Labor came out with their, I don't know exactly what you call it, but they basically came out and said, hey, fiduciary responsibility is a real thing. And if you don't get with the program, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. And a lot of people were thinking, oh my God, we're all going to be fiduciaries. And so this surge of creation of RIAs, it was already building, but it exploded. And what I began to realize through a lot of my contacts who had gone independent and were running their own firm was that there's this magic spot. Once you reach about 300 million in AUM, or have the revenue of a firm that does, or up to about 800 million in AUM. So that little $500 million window, you've got a lot of hiring need. You can't be the chief bottle washer, the chief compliance officer, the chief executive officer, the financial advisor, every single thing. You need help. And so where I specialize is in that little sweet spot between 300 and 800 million in AUM, or the revenue equivalent, because a lot of people do a lot of insurance business as well. But I place key people into their organizations that really allow the entrepreneur to do what they enjoy. Most of them are visionaries. And so I'll give you an example. In the state of Indiana, I'm working with a gentleman who created a firm. He's in his mid-30s. It's been wildly successful, but he's running the sales team. All the operations was reporting up to him. And he was just like, Blair, I feel like I'm working 20 out of 24 hours in a day and at least 6 days a week. And this is kind of miserable. I'd like to find someone who's run a firm like this. And so I was able to go and find a chief operating officer who had been a COO at a $20 billion RIA, who had been there, done that. He had fought all the wars, and he knew how to put in the systems and processes to streamline and really make an RIA efficient. And we put him in. He was there about 6 months now. And about 3 weeks ago, I got a call from that same entrepreneur who hired me. And he goes, that worked so well. Now I need you to find someone who can run all of my sales. And so if I could have them run that. So now he's going to get a COO and a CSO. And that way he can be the visionary. He can work with the selected clients that he wants. He can find new markets to market into. He can buy new firms. He can do radio and TV and do all these things on a marketing perspective that is what brings him joy in life, and not, crunching all the numbers or handling the software that's going to integrate this into that. And so that's what I do, is I find people who allow the entrepreneur to do what they enjoy. And oftentimes that's handling compliance and operations for them. That's two very common things that I search for.
So have you ever racked my brain for the name of the book? And I think the title is called Rocket Fuel. It's an EOS book, and it talks about the visionary and the integrator and how those are two totally different people, and one can't really live without the other. And what you're saying kind of reminds me of that book. And you answered one of my questions that I was planning to ask, which is, at what point does it make sense for someone to expand their team beyond an executive assistant and a junior advisor? Like, I feel like those are kind of the typical first hires beyond you, the advisor yourself. It's, hey, I need another version of me. I need an assistant. Perhaps, I have like a director of operations. But it sounds like, if I heard you correctly, right around that 300 million or similar revenue, to 800 million is kind of where you really want to start to find very, very high quality, experienced people at that C level. So with that being said, are you finding that most often their first C level person that they're bringing on is a chief operating officer? Or I guess, what else are you seeing in terms of other roles that have been needed as like that first hire?
Yeah, usually if you're big enough, and at usually 3 million and bigger in annual revenue is kind of what I would quote big enough. What you typically see, the first two roles that come through are chief compliance officer and chief operating officer. Most people who create a wealth management firm are not operations. Yep, they're salespeople. They are financial advisors. They love investments. They love meeting with people. They're a people person. And so handling all the operations just isn't in their skill set. So that's a very typical first big position to hire. I had an interesting conversation with someone when they were thinking about the money. They're like, well, how much does that cost? And that's usually based on the size of the firm. But let's just, for argument's sake, say that I was talking about a $200,000 base salary plus, a bonus that would tie them to certain KPI that they might instill that were important to them. And so we're talking about that. And then they went to a conference and they met with all these other successful RIAs. And when they called me, they were like, Blair, I used to think that 200 or 250 was going to be really expensive. And then I realized I was the only single proprietor or sole proprietor at this conference. Everyone else had a partner. So they were essentially paying their COO half, of everything. Suddenly 250 sounded really cheap. So you deal with sticker price shock for sure, but usually chief compliance officer, like everyone typically likes the color orange, but no one wants to wear it, right? Especially not in a jumpsuit. So chief compliance officer, chief operations officer, those are usually the two first ones. I don't do chief investment officers until people get beyond my normal sweet spot. When they get $1 billion plus, then they start thinking, hey, we're in multiple markets. I'd like to create models, maybe get them into InvestNet, maybe offer some interesting things, have other people distribute them. And then that's when, I'm sort of looking at chief investment officers, chief executive officers, things of that nature. Those things usually come at the much higher end of the range or as you're cresting $1 billion and beyond.
Now, when you come across a client of yours or potential client of yours, or just a firm in general that has 300 million to 800 million, we'll stay in that sweet spot. Mm-hmm. I feel like they have a few different options when they reach that level. Option number one is stop growing and you don't need to hire anyone, right? Obviously, that's probably not an option that people tend to go with, but technically an option. Another option is to continue to hire for the roles that are needed to continue the expansion. And then another option is, rather than you trying to, create this on your own, why not just plug into a multi-billion-dollar firm who already has those things in place, right? Sure. Technically, that's an option as well. So my question then becomes, when does it make sense? Like, have you ever come across someone where you're like, I don't know if they should be doing this on their own. They should probably just go plug into something that's already in existence. Like, what is it about someone's qualities and talents and skill sets that make it more advantageous for them to just build this on their own and continue to be on the path that they're on, as opposed to plugging into a different firm? Because you see a lot of consolidation in the industry. So I'm curious to know, what qualities do these people have where you have that belief in them? Hey, you know what? You can actually do this on your own. Like, what do those look like?
Yeah, well, it's too generic of a word, but it's the only thing I know, and that is ambition. There are a lot of people, I'll just use some giant companies, that we all know. As a wholesaler, I was never attracted to the Putnam or the American Funds or Franklin Templeton job. Not because you wouldn't make a lot of money, not because you wouldn't have great conversations and meet good financial advisors, and all those things are fine. But I had the type of attitude that if I went to a place that was already wildly successful, no one was going to look back and go, and that's the day Blair showed up and he changed the trajectory of this firm. Whereas if I went to a small firm that maybe had a cool product, but they hadn't really built much out, I could look back and say, hey, I built that. It's the exact same reason where I've been able to afford someone to mow my yard pretty much since the first year I graduated from college. I continue to mow my own lawn because it's one of the first, it's one of the few things I can actually physically look at a mess, do some work, and then look at something that looks really clean and pretty. And quite frankly, not to blow my own horn, but the best in the neighborhood. Right. So I get off on that type of thing. And there are people who feel exactly like that. And they think it'd be nice, man, I could plug into this conglomerate, or I'd get these services and things of that nature. And then there's people who plug into ModelFA and say, hey, here's a section of my business that I'm not particularly good at, and I could use a lot of help here. And where I tend to look at people and go, you know what, you probably don't need me for this. You might want me for that. It's not in a, hey, sell your firm and go be part of this giant thing. But it's a, you really don't need a chief investment officer. You could outsource your chief investment officer for a hell of a lot cheaper. And I could bring in 10 of them. You could interview all 10, figure out what services they like, what pricing models you like, what the service is that you want, and figure out what's best for you. So I do a lot of introductions for outsourced COOs or outsourced chief investment officers. I don't tend to get into the specifics of when someone should join another firm. I've always kind of felt like, up to this point, I wouldn't recognize when it was better for someone to do that, because a lot of that is their inner workings of what drives them and motivates them. And not a lot of people sit down and open that much up to me. They usually say, all right, here's my vision. Here's what I need to accomplish. Or here's my vision. Here's the mess I'm in. What do you think I should do? But that might be because the conglomerators, never come to me and said, hey, Blair, I'll pay you X percentage if you refer people to me. So maybe it's all self-interest driven, but I haven't recognized that part of the business yet.
Cool.
Hey, Model FAs. I know you're enjoying this conversation, but I wanted to take a quick break to talk to you about the ModelFA Accelerator. This is a unique collaboration between us and you, where we help you build a financial advising practice that you can be proud of. We focus on the foundational concepts around how to pick a niche or a specialization, how to price your services, how to construct an offer that people are going to buy, and then how to market it and sell it in a way that'll get people to sign on the dotted line and become clients of your firm, all while giving you the information to scale and set up workflows and operational processes that will allow you to reclaim your time and build a practice that doesn't run you. So if you'd like to hear more about that, go to www.modelfa.com/accelerator or www.modelfa.com. Hover over, work with us, and click on Accelerator. Hope to see you in the program.
When you bring, let's use a COO as an example, you bring a COO into a firm, what are some reasons why it may not work out? Like, is it...
And I've had that happen.
Yeah. So maybe speak through an example, redact some names, of course, but like what are some potential roadblocks that people at that $300 to $800 million mark, what do they need to look out for to kind of save them some time of, falling flat on their face with the initial attempt at expanding their business?
So with your last question, I came up with a one-word answer, but didn't know that it fit. And that word was ambition. This word I know fits. It's ego. It is ego every time. It is, Blair, I hate running this part of my business. Please find me a COO. And we do. And they come in and 3 weeks, 3 months, 3 minutes into the relationship, the candidate is calling me and saying, well, Blair, we keep agreeing that we're going to institute this. And then they'll go out on a sales sales conference, and they'll come back, and all of a sudden in the morning meeting, they're integrating new policies that we hadn't even discussed. So like, I'm supposed to be the one who's putting these things into place. I'm supposed to be the one who's vetting these. And they keep coming back with these ideas, or they're changing their mind. Or, the phrase I hear a lot is they just can't stop getting in the way. And oftentimes the CEO or the founder is completely aware of it. Like, they don't refute it at all. Like, if I call it, I go, hey, your guy's struggling. Here's what I'm hearing. What's your take on it? They'll go, yeah, I do struggle with that. And it could be ego. It could just be that they are someone who struggles with relinquishing control. And those are things that, quite frankly, people, no matter who you put in that role, they're going to struggle with that. And so part of building a great team is knowing your own strengths and weaknesses and knowing how to get out of the way of your weaknesses and trusting that you hired the right person and trusting that they are putting things in place. And oftentimes the only way you can do that is by hiring experience. I've recruited for several people that are like, hey, we have a young, ambitious culture. We want to keep that, but we also want to grow to 20 billion and we want to create all these things. I was like, okay, well, if I bring another 32-year-old into your organization, they probably haven't done all of that, right? They haven't seen those wars. They haven't seen things go to hell and learned how to fix it. And so you'll have yet another person in your organization learning on the fly. And so oftentimes someone has to kind of wrestle with, well, what is the culture of my firm? What things am I willing to sacrifice? What things may look different in a photograph on our website versus, thank God I hired someone with 20 years experience, because we got into this mix and they got us right out of it. And so it's usually ego or that just unrelenting need to control everything. And, I've hired people that have struggled for sure. Luckily, it's been fewer and further between, but it happens. And when I'm vetting and when I'm getting to know the owner, I recognize those things. If they're like, hey, we have a lot of turnover issues. Like, all right, well, let's dig into that. Why are people leaving your firm all the time? Sometimes they know, like, I'm hard on them. Like, I hold them to my standard. I'm like, well, good luck with that. Let's figure out a standard that is reasonable to hold people to, and let's kind of work from there. But yeah, those are some of the things that can go wrong.
Seems like you're a mixture of a recruiter, consultant, therapist, kind of all wrapped into one, depending on the particular scenario.
Yeah, thank God I went to school to be a pastor, right? So you kind of learn that, that calm demeanor. I've got a sign. I mean, the camera's pointing at me. It's not pointing that way, but there's a sign and it's stolen, right straight from, I think, the Navy SEALs or the Marines, but it just says slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And I try to emulate with my, what I call hiring managers, because they're the person hiring, but they're usually CEOs or owner founders. But I try to emulate slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Like, let's create a process. Let's have a calm demeanor. Let's talk to people. If you have issues, call me, run it by me first. Let me know what your thoughts are. And that's not easy in today's market because candidates are flipping hard to find. A firm in Houston reached out to me today and they're like, okay, we're ready to move forward, with that candidate. And I was like, well, you went on vacation and then you came back and got COVID. 2 weeks have gone by. That candidate's got another job, man. I mean, you got to be able to move these things forward. Right. That happens. There's other fish in the sea. But yes, I do end up being a therapist. I do end up being a coach. I end up being a sounding board. There's a lot of roles that I play in addition to recruiter. I'm kind of a weird recruiter. I like the term headhunter because that's what I feel like. Like, I'm going out and looking for a certain type of person and bringing that person in. And,
right.
And I kind of like the idea of the headhunter. That I think more than anything that encompasses how I see the job. So yeah, there's a lot of roles that I play. And that, quite frankly, is what makes the job fun. If it was just cold calling and being told no all day, who would want to do that? But it's all the different roles that, that lead to the nuance. And it's also why, when I first started, I was like, why won't people hire me? And now I realize, I was like, oh yeah, because I didn't know anything. There's a lot of subtlety and nuance and wisdom that kind of goes into being a successful recruiter. And so it's definitely the only job I've ever really realized, what Malcolm Gladwell was talking about with the 10,000 hours. When I wholesaled, I was on the back of a hot product. So I had success immediately. If I had read back, I wouldn't have had any understanding of it. But after 5 years of doing this, I was like, golly, what I know now and all the mistakes I was making, early on. And most of them were the same thing that a lot of your audience deals with, which is a scarcity mentality. Like, this is all going to go away. And I'm afraid to invest in my firm. And so by the time people come to you, they're probably at a point of like, hey, I've tried this 20 different ways and failed. And I realize now I need to invest in this part of my business. And that was hard for me to learn too. So, we all go through the same business cycles. And so, yeah, it does lend to a lot of different roles within one.
Let's pivot slightly. So you had given an example earlier in this conversation. I don't know if it was a legit example or just kind of speaking, in a general sense, but I know a lot of this has been focused on the advisor themselves and how do we actually get them to continue to grow and free up capacity, get out of their own way. But I want to now kind of speak through the lens of that C-level executive that you're bringing into the firm. So the example that you alluded to is, there was someone who was a COO of a $20 billion firm or whatever the metric was, and then they're going to a $300 to $800 million firm. Explain to me kind of like, if I'm a COO listening to this, because we don't have just advisors listening to this podcast, we have support staff and other executives in the industry listening as well. What is it that is exciting to someone who's already kind of made it to that, $1 billion mark running that size firm to then what could be perceived as downgrading to a smaller firm? Like, what is your kind of sales pitch, so to speak, to get them excited? Like, what is it about that transition that lights them up?
And when you say a perceived downshift or something like that, it is. There's no way around it. I will tell you, I don't know how salty the language is that you require or that you would like on your podcast. So I'll soften it up. But it's usually that the owner is a big jerk, that they work for. And they've been promised equity. They've been promised
false promises.
And all the metrics, in their mind have been met. They've achieved beyond, the original expectations. And yet, I'm not an owner in this firm. I could be fired at any minute. Or a lot of it is, well, it's a family-run business, and my last name isn't the same as the family, that runs it. So I'm kind of limited here. There are just some people, my uncle was one of them. He just liked to, let me go take a car out of the junkyard that's got a cool body on it, and I'll piece it together over time, and I'll have a 65 Mustang. There are just people who like to tinker, and they like to build things. And so my goal every day when I show up at work, I don't always have something to talk to someone about, but my goal is to talk to 3 executives from RIAs across the country just to get to know them. What makes you float? What gets you excited? What do you love about your job? In fact, I've got a little sticky here. I learned this from a guy from State Farm Insurance. And it just says, I don't know if you can see that, but what do you have? What do you like about it? What do you dislike about it? What do you want? I just keep that up there. And in every conversation I have, I try to figure out, what does this person have, right? What is their gig? What do they like about it? What do they dislike about it? What do they want? And if I get to know enough of those people, and some people are super friendly and they'll tell you everything. Some people are, more reserved. And some of that's geographical. People in the South are a little bit more, open and giving, and, in other parts of the country, maybe not so much. But I tried to sort of build this database in my head and, of course, in my CRM system that learns what people like. And I end every conversation about the same, which is, if I were to find something that had this, this, and this, based on their haves and their likes and their dislikes, is it worth a call? And most of them will say, yeah, if you find something like that, it is. And then I'll say, okay, at what dollar amount does it make sense for me to give you a call? And they'll say, well, it probably needs to pay at least X. So over an 8-9 year career of trying to do that 3 times a day, 5 days a week, you build up a pretty nice database of candidates that are not open to anything. They're as happy as a clam. Or if you have this, I'd be interested, And so then it's like matching, right? Okay, well, this person needs a chief sales officer and they need someone who knows how to motivate FAs, knows how to recruit FAs, et cetera. All right, they're in this geographical area. I go to my CRM system, I type in keywords and search codes and all the magic that makes it hum.
Right.
And pull out a list of people to start calling and saying, hey, Blair, or I don't say, hey, Blair, they say, hey, Blair. And I say, well, hey, back in 2018, we talked and you said this, I've got something like that. And that's legitimate. Like I will say, like I had the conversation in Indiana today. I was like, well, in 2018, you said, and he goes, well, life has changed since 2018, Blair. I don't know if you know this, but yeah, it's just trying to be a good listener and understanding what makes people tick, because everyone's different. And most people are super happy in their jobs. I mean, it's not as if I call 10 people and I get 10 candidates.
Right.
If I call 20 and I get one, I'm pretty excited. Like, okay, cool. I've got one good candidate. Because it only takes 3 or 4. Usually if you introduce someone to 3 or 4 really highly qualified, wonderfully accomplished people, they're going to hire one of them,
Right.
And so it just sort of builds on itself. And that's why I said earlier in the conversation, it gets a little better every year. It's just, I know more people. I can be more discerning. And that makes you a better recruiter too, because you're not clinging to every candidate, like hoping to God this works. You have backup plans and plan Bs and all that.
Well, it's cool to hear too. It's a reminder for folks who already have a legit team that there's someone like you who's touching base with their folks who
For sure.
may catch them at the time where, you had an argument and they're like, you know what, I'm looking for a change. I'm going to reach back out to Blair. So it should hopefully, in theory, keep folks on their toes, appreciate what they have, make sure to focus on the culture within their firm, because if not, there's folks out there that can, find a better home for them. So hopefully that piece of this conversation kind of puts into perspective the fact that, you got to be appreciative and take care of the folks that are taking care of you in the firm.
If you feel like you've got a steal on your hands, like this employee of mine, my God, the dollar amount I get for how much I invest in them, believe me, they feel that way too. Like it is not just you that thinks you have a good deal on that guy. You're exactly right. And, I alluded to it with that example, of someone going on vacation and things of that nature. Like people have options, like an insane amount of options right now.
Well, especially with the remote work and,
Yes.
all that type of stuff, it's probably expanded, the opportunities that you have to offer with people being open to, hiring remote folks and working remote.
Well, and that's been a huge thing to overcome, because a lot of people were forced to allow their employees to work remote. Like I was one, I liked everyone in the same room. I liked hearing all the conversations and all of that. And then, a pandemic, led us to go work from home. And what I discovered from that is people are okay with their team, who they have trust doing it. But when they want me to hire someone, they want that person to come into the office. And I'm like, okay, what premium are you willing to pay? Because these people are all working from home. They love it.
Right.
And they're like, no, I don't want them to work from home. I want them to come into the office. It's like, okay, well, recognize that they are working from home. And so that may be a disincentive, for them. And so I've got a client right now. One of the things that they say, and it's dead on true, they're like, hey, we have 15 employees and we have 7,000 square feet. We can socially distance like no other. Like everyone's got their own 20 feet of, of space around them. So yes, we're in the same building and we can all communicate, but you are safe. We are not going to, we're not going to get on people. And, it's amazing how many candidates I have right now that are from the Northeast and they're tired of it. And they're like, hey, find me a job in Florida or Texas. Like, I just want some freedom. And so, if you're based in that area, you might want to be open to having your people work remote because, people like me, and I'm not the only one, but, I've got a stack of really high quality, amazing candidates that they just want to go to a restaurant and not wear a mask or have some freedoms that maybe have been taken away from them. And I think I'm talking to one right now, David. Didn't you move to Florida just during the pandemic?
I've been smirking. We're bringing Florida and Texas together. Yeah. I moved here a year and a half ago for that very reason. I wanted freedom and I wanted nice weather. And I was at the point in my life where I could just pick up and move and start over, and was fortunate that, ModelFA, even before the pandemic, we have a decentralized team. So it didn't matter where you lived. So I was like, you know what? I'm picking up and moving. And I've had a few friends of mine already, follow down to Florida and move down here. So you're opening up your pipeline a little bit more if you're open to remote style work.
No doubt.
Or remote style workers, I should say, as a firm looking to hire. So I can see how that's been a trend for sure.
And you could save quite a bit of money as well.
Right.
I know just little old me, running a boutique recruiting firm, when I moved everyone home, I personally took about $100,000 pay raise because I no longer had rent and, a triple net lease and things of that nature. And so all that money just like, oh, well, that just goes to me as the owner. So yeah, exactly. So there's some great advantages to it, monetarily. And you can use that as a perk in the recruiting process, where you're not having to pay someone this huge premium. If they're going into an office and they're whipped to death by it and you're okay with them working remotely, guess what? You can probably offer them a little bit less. And for them, that's a major perk, and they would take less to be able to work from home. So there's some ways that you can put those chips that are on the table. You can put them right in front of you and have it work and leverage to your advantage.
100%. Well, this was very helpful and insightful selfishly for me, because a lot of the recruiters that I've had experience with, they fit two categories. One is recruiting established books of business to be able to join a larger firm. And the other one is finding, additional staff people, but below that kind of C level. So having you as, that C-level style recruiter, this conversation has been helpful for me to understand how that space works and operates. Before we wrap up, for those of you who this may be your first time listening, part of the goal of the podcast, outside of obviously bringing on, stellar guests like Blair and adding value in their area of expertise, the other purpose is to promote learning both in and out of our industry. And there's so many different books, as an example, that are out there that, it's tough to determine, hey, which one does it actually make sense to invest, some time in consuming. So I ask all of our guests what one of their favorite books is and to explain why it's one of their favorite books and what impact it had on them. So Blair, you mentioned a book by Bryce Hoffman, American Icon, Alan Mulally, and The Fight to Save Ford Motor Company. Why'd you pick that one?
Well, since reading this, I bought 2 Fords, by the way. But
oh, there you go.
It was recommended to me. So I went to lunch with someone who worked for Bain, and they were looking to move across the country. And I didn't recruit in the space that they were in, but on her resume that I was giving her some coaching on, she had written this as her favorite book. And so I asked her about it, and she told me enough that got me interested. I read it. I ended up buying 20 copies and sending it to 20 clients that I had worked with that year. That was my Christmas gift to everyone. But it is the story of thinking outside of the box. And it is thinking outside of the box under one of the biggest spotlights that is available, and that is Ford Motor Company. And I've continued to buy Ford, stock, even though it's certainly, way more sexy to buy, something that might be electric and rechargeable and things of that nature. But It is an outsider that he was moved into the CEO role of Ford Motor Company from the COO role of Boeing. And most people in Detroit thought he would absolutely fail. You just didn't come to the automobile industry from outside of the automobile industry. And, from a 30,000 or 10,000 foot view, there's obviously, similarities between a giant, plane manufacturer and a giant car. But what he had done as a COO at Boeing was really the efficiency, the processes, and he was so good at reading people and get them to focus on what he believed was important. And he has a lot of steps that goes into in the book about how do you find out what's important about the process and what are you trying to accomplish? And how do you work backwards from a solution to back to the problem and vice versa? And the turnaround that he had at Ford was absolutely astronomical, just in terms of quality, profitability, on any measurable that you could think of during his time. And so for me, it's so rare that I get to recruit from outside of the industry. Most people in financial services, well, I'm trying to build an RIA. Find me someone who's built an RIA. And I completely understand that. And I like to try to get one or two candidates in there that come at the problem from a different perspective. They're not often hired, but it's a good brain exercise for my CEOs to see how someone from outside of the industry would look at this problem. And beyond a lot of the terminology that we use in this industry, a lot of problem solving is the same. And so I just really took a lot from American Icon about how you could lift out these systems and processes and decision-making and team building. And it really just poured into my work and the perspective that I had on my industry changed and my appreciation for people who have a different perspective. So I found it to be as enjoyable of a read as a fiction book, but I highly recommend American Icon. It's been a couple of years since I've read it, but just kind of talking about it today makes me want to go back and re-explore it.
Well, I appreciate that overview. As you were going through that, I was sold about halfway through. So I went on my Audible account and scooped that up. So I'll let you know when I'm done it. But no, I appreciate that. Appreciate you joining. Everyone listening, appreciate your attention throughout this episode. Hopefully you got some good nuggets along the way. But with that being said, Blair, if I'm a COO listening or a C-level person, or if I'm an advisor listening and I'd like to, touch base with you, connect and perhaps engage with you, where do I go?
Yeah. So, probably the easiest way to do it is LinkedIn. I'm one of the only Blair Lewises, on there. My company is called Global Recruiters Network. We shorten that, but GRN. So you could find me at grnmidcities.com or grnmid-cities.com. They both work. And so that's usually the best place. I'm not super active on Twitter. You could probably find me on Instagram, but it's boring pictures of my family on YouTube and things of that nature. But most of what I do is LinkedIn driven. And, if you find the website, it'll have a phone number. I think my phone number is on my LinkedIn profile, so you can always call, but usually shooting an email gets it done. I answer all my emails and get back with everyone. So if you find me, you will find someone who will respond.
Love it. Well, for those of you who are listening, hopefully you found some value in today's conversation. Really appreciate it if you did us a solid and shared the show, perhaps even leave us a review on iTunes. Let's see if we can get from a top 2.5% podcast up to a top 0.5% podcast over this next year, but won't be able to do that without your help and obviously the help of our guests moving forward. So if you found some value, go ahead, share it, please. Leave a review. And with that being said, Blair, I very much appreciate your time spent today, the connection that we've begun to forge. Excited to see where it leads and what it turns into. And obviously, this is all a result of the introduction from Brian. So another shout out to Brian and a thank you to him. But Blair, appreciate you joining today.
Man, my pleasure. David, it's been a long time since I thought of some of those stories. So I appreciate the walk down memory lane. And I look forward to continuing our relationship as well.
Awesome. Take care.